Hi friends, it's Beth here with Aging Care Solutions, offering personal and professional experience and guidance for caregivers, families, and seniors who are traveling the care journey. Welcome back, and welcome to this particular video. This one is sort of near and dear to my heart because I spent more than a decade helping my parent, my mother, from the very early stages till the day that she passed. And it was about, I want to say probably since 2008, and then she passed in 2019. So it was about 11 years from the time that I identified it, got a baseline MRI for her brain, and then, was alerted to the fact that she was becoming very forgetful. Friends and family were noticing, as well as my grandmother's assisted living. They noticed that my mother was coming in and out and doing repetitive tasks like writing rent checks more than once or twice a month. She was also coming in and picking up my grandmother's laundry and doing the laundry and going back with the clean laundry again. So there was some different behaviors that were noticed by them and alerted me. And the biggest problem was that she lived almost 6 hours from me. So it was the very early part of this illness that started to settle in with her. So I was not in a position to actually, move her at that time. And she wasn't bad enough that she needed to be moved then. The biggest challenge was that she lived alone. She was highly independent. She was very fit. She was she was what I deemed athletic. She played tennis for 30 years. She managed her finances very well. She had a good group of friends. She was very involved. She volunteered a lot. She worked in the school system for many, many years and was real sharp. I mean, she really had. And then my dad died. She was widowed at about 54 years old. And so, it was probably when she was 70, somewhere thereabouts, that we recognized that something was starting to happen. So they say that it takes years, sometimes a decade or more of whatever this is, inflammation of the brain or toxins or these amyloid plaques building in the brain, to start taking hold and blocking the pathways. And that's exactly what it looked like, to her neurologist. So the first thing I did was I made sure that all of her doctors had a power of attorney, knowing that I was going to be asking questions on her behalf. And then I set about just checking on her daily, telling my neighbors, look, I'm starting to worry about her. And they would call me and say, your mom told me she thought somebody was in the house. Could I go through the house? So my neighbor, who'd been our neighbor for many years, went, and it's still there. His house is still there, but we had to sell. Anyway, so I enlisted a whole bunch of different people to check. Is her car in the driveway, or is she? So he would go over and check on her, and then everything's okay. You're fine. But anyway, I would say the early stages, I was just very patient with her. There was times that I was very frustrated, but I also understood that I had to focus on maintaining her well-being and her safety above all else, because I also noticed that my mother loved to donate. And when I switched her mail, when I did finally move her, and it wasn't that long afterwards, it was in 2010 that I moved her here to the state of Maryland, her mail was coming, and I am telling you, she made a lot of donations. She was very generous, my mom. So, someone that does have dementia or that does have forgetfulness, and we all do at times, I can't find my keys a lot of the time either, and I can't remember where I parked my car when I leave the store. So I get it. But couple that with, lack of sleep was her big thing. She was also put on a statin drug, which I don't feel that everybody needs to be on a statin drug. I think our body makes cholesterol for a reason. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. But the woman was fairly healthy until she was put on that, and they kept upping it and upping it and upping it. And then, of course, they provided her with Aricept and Namenda, which they also manufactured. So I still am uncertain about what caused it, which most of us are uncertain about what caused it. if someone worked in a toxic environment or a mine, or they were exposed to things, or they maybe had head injuries, there's explanations for things. And, there's just no telling. I mean, there's no telling. There's really no telling what causes it. But one of the things that I try to do is focus on staying in touch with her. Now, until and unless your parent is living with you, you're going to have to really start to pull together either, the neighbors, have the neighbors have an extra key, or use a lockbox and have that handy in the house so that if anybody has to come over and your parent can't answer. But I would stay in touch with them by phone for sure. There's no doubt about it. And then I would focus on, instead of dwelling on what they are losing, is focus on what their strengths were. And her strength was she loved to walk. She had a lot of energy, my mother. So, I would say to her, I'm going to need your help. I want you to come down and visit. And my window really came when my grandmother passed. So my grandmother had a fall and fractured the ball of her hip. And over the course of 10 days, she did not really come out of the anesthesia, and she died quietly by opening her eyes and saying goodbye to the four of us that were standing there praying for her and just telling her how much we loved her. And that sort of turned into my window. That was in mid to late January of 2010, and by May, my mother was moved. I also was packing up the childhood home that I lived in and taking only what I was going to need to move into her assisted living. And I'll tell you, you don't need to move that entire home. It's not advisable. I would sell. That's what I did, is I hired an auction, house to come in, take a full inventory, get a list of everything that you're going to be letting go, and have them sell it for you. And just seek the support that you're going to need. I did hire a woman. She was a retired nurse. Her name was Debbie, and she would stop in and see my mother. And my mother was like, why does this lady keep coming to my house? Why does she keep coming here? I'm fine. I'm in the middle of watching. She loved The Simpsons, my mother. If you called her and they were on, she's like, I can't talk. The Simpsons are on. Oh, my gosh. Anyway, she didn't know why this lady kept coming to her house. So I told her, I said, Mom, you're starting to have some memory impairment. And that's when I got the letter from her doctor. Her neurologist also wrote a little letter. It doesn't have to be a lot. And then her financial advisor and her elder law attorney. I was like, you know what? I'm not taking any chances with all of this. It was the first time in my family's history that I could recall that I was going to be tasked with helping to manage someone who was, and I didn't know how long this illness was going to last. I had no idea. But I just knew that I needed to do everything I could to make sure she was in a safe environment. And so once I moved her, I knew she was safe because she was at my house. And I had small children. They were 2 years old. So my twins she loved being around them. She was very helpful. But there was times I would leave her in the car with them while I ran into a store for 5 minutes, and I'd come out and the car alarm is going off, or someone's crying and she's upset. And so I understood pretty quickly that I had to manage her like I did the children at times, because she would get very upset. She was emotionally, she had changed. She was reverting back to when she was a child. So I needed to really, address her with that. I never, questioned, what did you mean by that? Or that's not what's going on. I've already talked. I never would say that. In fact, it really bothered me when people would correct somebody who had dementia. I would sit with families and I would go in and I'd be living what they're going through. They're like, Dad was just driving 4 months ago and now he doesn't know who anybody is, or he's struggling to remember and do his daily activities. And I would understand what they're going through, because sometimes it does come on quickly depending on what their diagnosis is. If it's Lewy body, then it's going to be very progressive and very quickly, challenge that person and their ability to manage themselves. And they're either going to need to be safely in a home that, where you almost have someone who could get out. You're going to have to figure out how to protect them, and put alarms on your doors if you have to. If they're going to stay home, you're going to have to. It becomes very exhausting for a spouse and family members when somebody gets their days and nights mixed up and they're up all night watching TV and turning all the lights on in the home and having the TV up loud. while everyone else is trying to sleep. And then during the day, they're so exhausted because their brain isn't working right that they're dozing and napping, dozing and napping. So they get their days and nights mixed up. But it's really just seeking out the support groups, the physicians that you're going to need. I established all new physicians for her, so I got a better handle on what was going on, and then we could, do our best to help her. Within a year, her name came up on the wait list, and we moved her to a community where she was able to stay in assisted living, but not for very long. It was probably about a year. They were worried that because anybody on the floor and the part of the campus that she was on was able to get out the door, that they were worried that maybe she would wander out, even though I wasn't really worried about that then. But, she was coming down to the lobby in the evenings in her nightgown, and they were like, yeah, we're not sure if your mom's really understanding that, how she's doing. So anyways, trying to seek the right support and also find the right environment. If your parent has the money, and some places are willing to work with you. So I know that it's expensive because we paid privately for almost 10 years. So I do get it. I do understand. My mother had a teacher's pension or a school system pension and Social Security, and then she did have private assets that helped pay for that. But every time your level of care goes up, so does the cost. So she started out in AL, assisted living, and she did pretty well. She was signed into the Connections Club, which met a few days a week. But a lot of times you can't keep them engaged. She was one of them. She was like, she would feel bored and she'd get up and walk out and go back to her room, or she'd walk around the building and sit and listen to the TV that was playing in another area, or she'd go back to her room and take a nap or whatever, socialize with people. But it wasn't too long that she was moved to a more secured environment because she was considered a flight risk, and they were right on. They knew that she was going to eventually be confused for someone that worked there or try to get out, and so I understood that. And I just tried to, again, when communicating with her, we had fun. I mean, I'd bring the kids. She couldn't wait to see my little toddlers, and we would do things. We would take walks. I'd pick her up and we'd go to the store, or we would sometimes go to the mall, and we would walk, and then we would get something to eat, and then we'd go into the bookstore, whatever we felt like doing. But she did have somebody there helping her, and some of the things were were funny, and other times I was like, no. I remember being in Burlington Coat Factory, and she said, oh, I have to use the restroom. Okay, I'll wait outside the door. And doesn't she walk right into the men's room? And I was like, oh my God. I said, Mom. She goes, yeah. I said, Mom, you're in the men's room. She goes, no, I'm not. I said, oh my. So I waited outside the door to make sure nobody else went in there. And she came out and she goes, oh, I guess I was. I mean, it was stuff like that, just God love her. I was, it didn't matter. I was I was the right man for the job. But one of the things I did was I tried to reduce, I never played the radio when I was in the car because her brain there couldn't be a lot going on and have her understand or engage in conversation because her brain wasn't able to process it. So the music or anybody crying or singing or any background noise. So a lot of times I was by myself with her. I would keep things very quiet so that she felt okay. It was sort of like I was reducing the noise and any clutter that could clutter her brain. So I wouldn't ask her a lot of questions or expect her to have any type of a conversation or understand any current events. It wasn't like I was going to talk about politics with her or, wow, did you see that big, huge thing that happened in the No. So I minimized all of it. Many times I would hold her hand or just sit with her or walk with her. Sometimes I would ask her, do you want a hug? Yes. And so I'd give her a hug. But I was very patient with her because she was slowly becoming my child. She called me Mom on the regular. I would see her and she'd say, oh, Mommy, you're here. So, just knowing how vulnerable she was, I knew that she wasn't going to be safe in her own home. And so moving her and finding the right environment became a huge priority. So if you are going through this, if you're starting to see that maybe your dad is managing your mom or even you are managing a parent, these are all things that are going to be challenging for you, whether you're in a townhome or an apartment or a large home, all the exits could potentially spell a problem if somebody is up at night and you are sleeping, and they can get outside. I mean, you do hear about it. You hear about people wandering out in their nightgown or their pajamas, and they find them. I've had this happen so many times I can't even tell you. One of our clients went out. The husband went out, and he fell. He fell behind the shrubs somehow, getting the newspaper at 5 o'clock in the morning, and the wife couldn't find him. She was like, "Where the heck is he?" So after a number of hours, somebody out for a run saw him in the front yard and called 911 and knocked on the door, and the wife answered. "Oh, there he is." But he was hypothermic. I mean, it happens all the time. It happens a lot. And it's because living in a home where there's a number of exits and somebody, they used to sometimes tell you to cover the doors with, you want to paint the door the same color as the walls, cover the handle so it doesn't look like a handle, and put locks on, so you're locking yourself in your house, basically. You can also have alarms put on the doors. People have put alarms on there so that, it wakes them up. But you're just going to have to realize that this situation is going to progress, that person's inability to manage themselves. Now, some of the things like their activities of daily living, you'll hear that term ADLs, they can maintain those because those are some of the first skills that they learned, how to toilet themselves and wipe and wash their hands, brushing their teeth, helping, dressing themselves. So those are some of the things that are the last to go. The others, and then there's autonomic activities, breathing, swallowing, chewing and swallowing, drinking. Those are all things that are automatic to the body. But it's any time that the brain is challenged to figure something out, like a puzzle or read. My mother was a voracious reader. I mean, she was at the library. She'd sometimes go to the library and get a book, and she'd realize, I read that book already. So so she stopped being able to read, and even looking at pictures, I think, were confusing because you couldn't correlate what the story was about to the picture that you were looking at. So it's a very unforgiving illness. And so it's really about validating their feelings. If they're sad, a hug, acknowledging that they're scared. A lot of women stand by the door wherever they live and they've got their purse, or even if they're home, I got to go to work. I have to go to work. I'm ready. They have their purse and they are ready to go out the door. You sort of want to live in their reality because all you're going to do is correct someone all day long. They're going to feel bad in that instant. They're going to realize, oh my God, is this really happening? And you are going to be so frustrated. To me, I was like, yep, that's what's happening. Whatever she thought was going on is exactly what was going on as far as I was concerned. Even if their memories or perceptions are different from what the reality of it is, just agreeing and acknowledging their feelings and trying to understand what they think happens or is going on. I checked on my mother a lot. I was up there as many times a week as I could. It turned out to be like 2 times a week, 3 times sometimes. I went back to work and my kids were starting preschool and kindergarten, so I was working and not able to it was a different county, so I wasn't able to really see her as often as I want. But I made sure that everybody knew who I was and that I was going to be there, and you wouldn't know what time of day or night I'd be showing up because I wanted them to know that I was on top of it. And if I thought for 1 minute that she wasn't getting good care, I would pull her out of there. And I did. I moved her once. It wasn't because of care. It was because I wanted her to move closer to where we lived because I knew that I'd be able to see her more regularly. It was also less expensive, but it wasn't the right environment. She was there for a year, and the house, even though it was secured and had a security system and a door system that made a noise when someone came and went, she followed somebody out. She followed a nurse out that was there to see another patient. And of course, they didn't know that she was, 1 minute she's sitting on the porch, and as soon as that person drove away, my mother was like, yep, I'm going for a walk. And off she went. So thank God her old assisted living took her back. She had only been gone for like 10 months or a year. So they were like, yep, we'll have her back. And we got her a nice little room all set up, Her room was always so cute. She loved it. It always reminded her of home. We decorated it very much like her bedroom at home. All of her things were hung up, all of her pictures and all of her cool little things, and her, of course, her bedding and her. It just looked just like her bedroom. Her favorite chair, her little TV, the phone that she kept losing with her name on it. Everything was labeled. All of her clothes, all of her shoes had her name. So one of the things that I tried to avoid was having an argument or correcting her. And I noticed this was with a family. There was a gentleman who this is the same family that I talked about before. This was the dad who was driving and shouldn't have been driving and ended up 3 hours away from his home in Maryland. Well, the son, who was a very high-powered attorney and very impatient, very much in charge of everybody and how things were going to go, continued to argue with his mother, who had dementia. He would correct her over and over. He was getting more frustrated, and every time I saw him, so finally I stood up. I said, Can I talk to you for just a second? And I sort of dressed him down, and I said, I know that you want things to be different, but your mother doesn't remember. As soon as a word or anything comes out of your mouth or hers, she is not going to recall that conversation. So to minimize your frustration, you're going to want to stop correcting her and reminding her, we just talked about this, Mom. We just talked about that. Or, why can't you remember? He's gone. He's dead. Don't do it. I said, don't do this because you're only frustrating yourself, and she's going to feel bad, and she's going to be left wondering, what did I do wrong? And, the thing is, this is beyond anyone's control. So I think he started to look at things differently after he had a couple real good interactions with his folks, and then somebody else kind of reframed it for him and had him understand this is a losing battle. You can be frustrated all you want, or you can sit there and just nod and say, okay, and answer her again. Answer the same question over and over. And then when your dad drives 3 hours from home, take the keys away. So anyway, I also like to interject humor as much as I could and keep things very lighthearted because it made her feel safer when she could find humor in things or just feel like a sense of security, like I'm safe. And she would ask all the time, is everything okay with my money? Yes, everything is okay with your money. If you want, I'll call your financial guy and get him on the phone. No, I believe you. Okay. As long as I know everything's okay. And that's what I would say to her many times. I'd say, how are you? I said, just so you know, everything's okay. And your money's okay, too. So I started preemptively letting her know everything's going to be okay. And when she was at our house, having a routine was really important because I was very busy. And there was it was loud at my house. So because when you have little kids, Elmo's on and this is on and we're taking a walk. We're going to the park. We're going to Mommy's play group and all these other things. And I was dragging her around with me because I wanted to still take care of my kids and do things that we were used to doing. And I couldn't leave her alone. So she would go with us. All of our errands, when we went grocery shopping, all these different things that we would do. So establishing a routine was really good for her. And she did well. She dressed herself and she would brush her teeth and I'd make her breakfast. It was just like we were doing things. She was helping me fold the laundry and just doing things that, that were needed to be done around the house. She loved to help. And she was just helpful with the kids. They'd look at books together and do different things, but she was in a safe environment, and that's really what was needed. I don't think she could have lived alone. Once I moved her, I knew I had done the right thing. So if you're considering that, if you're going to see and wait until something happens, I just don't know if that's a great idea. For me, I was too far away. If she had gotten out in the middle of winter, nobody would have known. Who would have known? There's nobody there to check on her. Me calling like that evening or the next day to check and say, how's everything going? No. So I think if you're considering moving your parent there, it's going to be a big change. You know that. I know that. And it would be for anybody. But there are ways to do it. And if you have the resources, it's less expensive to have them live with you. But then the trade-off is that you're doing everything that you can to keep that person safe, making sure that they're not ingesting things that they shouldn't be. When you move somebody into a dementia unit, they keep everything locked down, including the shampoo, because people will drink that. People will eat. If they see a pain reliever, they don't know. And so they try to minimize all of that and keep their cabinets locked with all their personal toiletries and sundries and things like that. So it's like trying to keep your home hazard free, and making sure that they're not a fall risk. I mean, there's so many different things. But the one thing that I would encourage, if you do have an adult living with you that has dementia, is consider an adult day program, especially if you're still working, even if you're working from home. These are tremendous services. They come right to the home to pick that person up, and they take good care of them. I mean, they're picked up usually between 8 and 9 a.m., and then they're dropped off between 3 and 4. So they have a lot of engagement, and they encourage physical activity. They do games and music and fitness, and there's sometimes a medical component. Check out my video on adult day and adult medical day if that's something that would help you. If that person's got that diagnosis, then they would qualify. They would qualify for, you'd have to pay for it unless they have Medicaid. And then encourage social engagement. My mother's friends, would call and talk to her on the phone for a few minutes here and there, and they would send her birthday cards. And, I didn't want her to be cut off from everybody, but she was slowly cutting herself off from everybody anyway and isolating herself. So we did try to do things that interest her. We would play badminton or play tennis in the house because I had a pretty big house and we had a long hallway. And so, sort of like the walls helped keep the ball in play. And my kids would throw the ball and she'd hit it back with her tennis racket. Sometimes so there was just ways that we knew that we would keep her engaged and sort of moving around. And she and I would take walks throughout the neighborhood. I'd push the stroller. And so that's kind of what I have on this topic as far as like caring for someone in the beginning stages of dementia and what it looks like. And that it does move quickly for some people. And sometimes what you have to realize is that person probably was dealing with this and having forgetful moments for a long time before maybe you recognized it. And if there's nobody living with them, it's kind of hard to identify it. It might take their friends and neighbors and acquaintances. So what I would do too is I would make sure everybody had your contact information. I would make sure that there's an extra key at one of the neighbors' houses. Maybe even put a lockbox with an extra key on the house. Some people have even put in cameras in the main living area of the home so that they can see if someone's up and moving about. And, there's different things that you can do. But I would say make sure that person is moved to a more secured, safe environment and not moving them from a house, which have been the family home that you grew up in, to another independent living situation like an apartment. Just because they won't have to manage a house does not mean that they are now capable of managing themselves any better if you move them to a smaller sized, say, apartment. They're still going to have to manage their own medication, buy their own groceries, get themselves to and from their doctor's appointments safely, engage and socialize, manage their laundry, do all these things independently. So my advice is don't move them from one independent spot to another independent community when clearly what they need is safety oversight. And that would be either at an assisted living where they have specialize in and have a secured part of their campus, their neighborhood, or in with you so that you can see how they're doing and how to best manage them. So I know this is kind of it's kind of a sad topic because all of us wonder, is this something that might happen to us? Does it run in families? I don't know. I mean, my mother's mother lived to be 97. She grew up on a farm, and I often wonder if maybe the foods that we eat, the toxins, the mercury in our mouths from amalgam fillings, I often wonder, is it a culmination of things that we've been exposed to, that we are still exposed to, toxins in our water, our foods? There's no telling. Nobody really knows. And there's millions and millions of dollars that have been pumped out to Alzheimer's fundraisers and NIH studies and whatnot. But I think the pillars of health, knowing that you're eating healthy, hydrating, that you're socially engaging with other people and challenging yourself and trying to keep your body fit and strong, I think that you've got a better chance of continuing to have brain health if you do some of those things too. So I wish you all the very best. If you have questions, please feel free to comment. I mean, I don't really get a lot of comments. I'm just growing this channel, but I really hope that my personal experience as well as my professional years of working with seniors and their families, can lend something that you hadn't really thought about as a helpful practice for you, or a way to keep your loved ones safe or yourself. Is, we're all aging, and I'm thinking to myself, what is that going to look like for me? So I just know that I'm gleaning a lot of information from this for myself too. So I wish you all the very best, and I will see you at the next video. Take care.